Ẹ kú dédé àkókò yìí gbogbo etí tó ń gbọ́ mi àti gbogbo olólùfẹ́ Samfatis Radio TV pátápátá káàkiri igun mẹ́rẹ̀ẹ̀rin àgbáláyé. Adúpẹ́ lọ́wọ́ yín bí ẹ ṣe ń bá wa pín káàkiri tẹ̀sù tún bá wa subscribe lágbára Ọlọ́run ọba Ọlọ́run ní fi kú yà wá. Lónìí tuntun tẹ́ ò tún máa gbọ́ níkànnì Samfatis Radio TV. Ó ní tó ń ṣẹlẹ̀ káàkiri ilẹ̀ adúláwọ̀ ilẹ̀ Burkina Faso òun ni màá fẹ́ ká yà sí lónìí. Díẹ̀ nínú nǹkan tó ń ṣẹlẹ̀ lọ́wọ́lọ́wọ́ ní ilẹ̀ Burkina Faso òun lẹ́ẹ̀ máa gbọ́ báyìí. Ní oṣù kẹrìndínlógún ọdún 2025 ọjọ́ tí kì í bá jẹ́ ọjọ́ mọ́nìgbàgbé nílẹ̀ adúláwọ̀. Nínú gbogbo ohun tó ṣẹlẹ̀ ní ọjọ́ yìí níṣe ni àwọn kan kó pàǹpá pọ̀ tí wọ́n gbé ìgbésẹ̀ láburú kan. Àwọn kan ni wọ́n kóra wọn jọ pọ̀ láti ṣekú pa ààrẹ Traoré èyí tí ń ṣe ààrẹ orílẹ̀-èdè Burkina Faso lórí èròǹgbà wọn láti sọ gbogbo ìlú Burkina Faso sínú kòbáolé sínú ìbànújẹ́. Ṣùgbọ́n gbogbo ète wọn lórí kí gbogbo ẹ̀ lè bàjẹ́ gbogbo ẹ̀ ló padà já sí asán ẹ̀gbọ́nà. Níbo la wá ń lọ nínú ayé yìí? Níbo la ń lọ lórílẹ̀-èdè kọ̀ọ̀kan? Ǹjẹ́ ẹ jẹ́ mọ̀ pé nínú àtẹ̀jáde tó tún jáde sórí fọ́nrán tó jáde káàkiri ìtàkùn ayélujára, ǹjẹ́ ẹ jẹ́ mọ̀ wípé ẹni tó súnmọ́ ààrẹ Traoré òun ló tún gbàbọ̀dè fún wọn. Ilé ayé ilé asán. Àgbàlájọ táwọn Yorùbá fi sọ wípé ẹ̀yìnkùlé lọ̀tá wà inú ilé la ṣe bí ń gbé. Ẹ̀kúnrẹ́rẹ́ gbogbo tó ṣẹlẹ̀ nílùú Burkina Faso pẹ̀lú ààrẹ wọn òun lẹ́mọ̀ gbọ́ lédè Gẹ̀ẹ́sì báyìí. Ẹ dákun bẹ́ẹ̀ bá ti gbọ́ tán àbí kẹ́ ẹ̀ tó gbọ́ ẹ bá ń subscribe sí Samfatis Radio TV kẹ́ ẹ̀ dẹ̀ tún bá ń pín káàkiri. Ẹ ṣé gan-an ni.
April 16th, 2025, a date that could have gone down as one of the darkest days in African history. Behind the scenes, a terrifying plan was unfolding. A group of traitors conspired to assassinate President Traoré and plunge Burkina Faso into chaos. And they weren't acting alone. These conspirators joined forces with terrorist groups, preparing to unleash coordinated attacks on innocent civilians and the Burkinabe military. It was a plot so well crafted, it nearly succeeded. But then, something incredible happened. Brave soldiers within the Burkinabe armed forces refused to betray their country. They exposed the plan, choosing loyalty over treachery. But here's where things get even more disturbing. The mastermind behind this failed coup didn't vanish into thin air. No, they fled to Ivory Coast, and instead of facing justice, they were welcomed. Now ask yourself, why would a fellow African country shelter someone who tried to tear apart a neighboring nation? Is this just politics? Or is something much deeper at play? Let's dig in. According to the Burkinabe Minister of Security, one of the key figures behind this deadly plot is someone no one expected, Barry Abdramain, not just an outsider or a rebel, but a respected officer from within, a senior member of the Burkinabe Military Justice Battalion. Think about that. A man trusted with the nation's security, turned into its enemy. Barry had access to top-level, highly sensitive military intel, and instead of protecting it, he handed it over to terrorist leaders fully aware of the destruction it could cause. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a slip. It was a calculated betrayal. He knew innocent lives would be lost, and he did it anyway. For what? Power? Revenge? Money? Barry didn't just betray the government. He betrayed every Burkinabe citizen who believes in peace, in unity, and in a future free from foreign-backed chaos. This is the kind of betrayal that tears nations apart from within. But Barry didn't act alone. He used his influence to pull others into his twisted mission. Fellow officers within the Burkinabe armed forces, men who once swore to protect the nation, were lured with promises of power, wealth, and high-ranking positions. If only they helped bring down Traoré. Even worse, Barry reached out to the militia group VDM. He paid them off, urged them to turn against the very country they were meant to defend, and planted seeds of betrayal in their minds. It wasn't just a coup attempt, it was a psychological war, and Barry was playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. And then, he vanished, just like that, gone without a trace. For weeks, no one knew where he had disappeared to, until Burkina Faso's intelligence office made a chilling discovery. Barry had fled to Ivory Coast. According to intelligence sources, the plan to assassinate Traoré and throw Burkina Faso into total chaos is still alive. It's being coordinated from Abidjan, Ivory Coast. The new goal? To strike before June 2025. This isn't just treason, it's war from the shadows, and the clock is ticking. So they failed on April 16th, but instead of backing down, they just changed the date. Now the new deadline is sometime before June 2025. That's not just alarming, it's heartbreaking. For years, we've pointed fingers at the West for sowing chaos and division across Africa. But what do you do when the ones causing destruction are your own people? These traitors, these Burkinabe citizens, have turned against everything their country stands for. Peace, stability, progress, they don't care. They've shut their eyes to the transformation under Traoré, the bold reforms, the national pride, the hope. Why? Why would any African choose to help outsiders tear down what we're finally starting to build? And then comes the part that makes it even more painful. Ivory Coast. A neighboring country, our supposed brother, has chosen to protect these traitors. Think about that. Instead of standing with Burkina Faso, instead of working with our authorities to bring these criminals to justice, they've rolled out the red carpet. Not a single word of condemnation, not a single official statement. Just silence. The kind of silence that speaks volumes. And it doesn't stop there. These enemies of the Burkinabe people haven't just been given shelter, they've been granted asylum, a safe haven to keep plotting, planning, and undermining peace. Now let's be honest. The reason is obvious to anyone paying attention. The presidency of Ivory Coast isn't acting on its own. It's a puppet, controlled by the same hands that have meddled in African affairs for decades. France. Alassane Ouattara didn't rise to power on his own. Let's not forget, his 2011 takeover came with the full support of France, and ever since, he's played his part, protecting French interests, not African unity. So yes, it's clear, this isn't just political, it's personal, it's strategic, and it's dangerous. The question now is, what will Burkina Faso do next? And more importantly, what will Africa do about its own betrayals? Let's go deeper. The story of Alassane Ouattara isn't just about politics. It's about long-term strategy and manipulation that began decades ago. Back in 1968, a young Ouattara was just 26 years old when France stepped in and handpicked him for a role at the International Monetary Fund. That was the beginning of a carefully crafted plan. With France pulling the strings, his rise was no coincidence. His path was fast-tracked, doors opened effortlessly, and by 1973, he was appointed chargé de mission at the Central Bank of West African States, conveniently stationed in Paris. Just 2 years later, another promotion. Then, in 1983, France ensured he became vice governor of the BCEAO. Piece by piece, the puppet was being positioned. But here's where the game gets even dirtier. While grooming Ouattara for leadership, France was simultaneously working behind the scenes to cripple Ivory Coast's economy. Yes, the same country they claimed to be helping. Policies were manipulated, growth was stifled, and slowly, the economy began to collapse. It was no accident, it was sabotage, perfectly timed. Because once Ivory Coast found itself desperate, drowning in economic crisis, France unveiled its solution. Enter Ouattara, the same man they had groomed for years, the one they had placed in every key financial institution. Now he was presented as the savior, the man who could rescue Ivory Coast. But it was never about saving the country, it was about control. And that's exactly how France embedded its influence into Ivorian leadership, not with tanks or coups, but with economics, manipulation, and a man named Alassane Ouattara. As Ivory Coast's economy spiraled deeper into crisis, France didn't back down. It doubled down, and so did its plans for Alassane Ouattara. With full French support, Ouattara returned to the International Monetary Fund. This time, not just as an economist, but as director of the African department. Simultaneously, he was made counselor to the IMF's managing director. He was being positioned on the world stage with a dual role designed to boost his international profile. 4 years later, he was sent back to the Central Bank of West African States, but not just as any official. He returned as governor of the bank. And of course, the position was conveniently based in France. By then, Ivory Coast's economy was on life support. The damage had been done. And for France, the time was finally right. The trap had been set. France needed to plant their puppet inside the Ivorian government. So they did what they do best: manipulation behind closed doors. Somehow they convinced President Houphouët-Boigny, the aging father of the nation, to appoint Ouattara as head of the country's economic stabilization program in 1990. They framed him as the economic savior, the man who could fix everything. But this wasn't about fixing anything. It was about legitimacy, about painting Ouattara as a national hero in the eyes of the public. And there was one more factor France was counting on: time. President Houphouët-Boigny was dying. He had undergone prostate cancer surgery in France, and the French government knew his health was failing. They knew the clock was ticking, so they moved fast. Behind the scenes, pressure mounted, and by the end of 1990, France had its way. President Houphouët-Boigny, weak, ailing, and vulnerable, was pressured into appointing Alassane Ouattara as Prime Minister of Ivory Coast. It was a masterstroke. France now had their man not just in the economy, but in political power. A puppet with a suit and a smile, ready to serve the interests of Paris, not Abidjan. At that point, France had done it. Their long-term mission was complete. They had successfully installed their man, their puppet, into one of the highest offices in Ivory Coast. With Alassane Ouattara as Prime Minister, everything was finally falling into place. The only thing left was to secure total loyalty, and France had a plan for that too. In 1991, as a reward for his obedience and usefulness, France offered Ouattara more than just political support. They gave him something far more symbolic: a wife. That year, Ouattara married Dominique Claudine Nouvion, a French woman, deeply rooted in the elite circles of France. This wasn't just a romantic union, it was a political seal, a binding contract, a message to the world that Ouattara's destiny was now forever intertwined with that of France. But here's the part few people know: this marriage wasn't just celebrated, it was sanctioned. It was approved by none other than the former president of France himself. In fact, the man who officiated the wedding ceremony was Nicolas Sarkozy, at the time, mayor of Neuilly-sur-Seine. Yes, the very same Sarkozy who would later become president of France. So ask yourself, what kind of African leader needs the approval of the French presidency to marry? This wasn't just a wedding, a symbolic confirmation that Ouattara was now France's man in West Africa, not just in office, but in life. Sarkozy officiating Ouattara's wedding wasn't just a gesture, it was a preview of things to come. Because years later, that very same Sarkozy would play a central role in making sure Ouattara would not just serve France, but rule Côte d'Ivoire as its president. But that power grab didn't happen overnight. France had a blueprint.
Óyá o, ẹ bá wa dòwò pọ̀ kájọ ṣoríire. Óyá o, óyá o, ẹ bá wa dòwò pọ̀ kájọ ṣoríire. Óyá o, óyá o, ẹ bá wa dòwò pọ̀ kájọ ṣoríire. Óyá o, óyá o, ẹ bá wa dòwò pọ̀ kájọ ṣoríire.
ní Sanfatis FM ọmọ aládé ni wá gbogbo ìran káràkátà tó ń ṣòwò gbogbo fílílẹ̀ yìí tà ní tàbílẹ̀ oúnjẹ aṣọ tàbí ìwé ewébẹ̀ ẹran kódà bó jẹ́ pọ̀nmọ́ kàn sí wa ní Sanfatis FM lónìí lágbóhùn tẹ́ǹtà fàyè gbọ́ ẹ̀kúnrẹ́rẹ́ àlàyé síwájú sí i ẹ pè tàbí kẹ́ WhatsApp +447 946 212 160 Sanfatis FM òkè láyé tí wá.